oppressed, their family members were oppressed with the ascendancy of the Cuban Revolution, the Fidel Castro and the revolutionaries assuming power and authority in Cuba. And they would talk about how they lost their homes and they lost their freedoms, etc. And it's not that all of them are true, are lying. In fact, most of them may be telling the truth. But that is the consequence of revolution. Revolution recognized as an oppressed and an oppressor. And the oppressed people in Cuba overthrew the oppressors and kicked them out, took their property, put them in jail, kicked them out of the country, whatever. That's what revolutions do. That's what we're supposed to do. Because if the revolution didn't do that, the Cuban Revolution wouldn't exist today. That Fidel wouldn't have lived to be 90 years old, as the CIA and the US government did everything it could to overthrow that government, to make sure that there would not be some kind of example of a worker-led, peasant-led, free state that provided free healthcare, free education, that sent doctors to poor people all around the world, that even sent forces, revolutionaries into Africa to try to facilitate a continental-wide revolutionary movement, that sent revolutionaries throughout South America, that led to the existence, contributed to the existence of the Sandinistas in Nicaragua and the Tupumaras in Uruguay and Peru after that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, and they are the ones who held up the whole notion of socialist morality in a sea of a cesspool of capitalist morality that allowed them to starve people to death and brag about being the somehow shining city on the hill while they are starving everybody below, etc. So they became the ideal, and yes, they are putting people in prison. They did put people in prison, and the people in Miami may not be lying. And guess what? When we succeed in the revolution here, they're going to have to find some other place to go and cry, because their property will be taken. The exploiters will have their property taken. The oppressors will find themselves in jail, etc. And that's the nature of the social system. And this lie that people are living with today is part of why we have to have the study on opportunism and the question of theory, because if there are oppressed people, there must be an oppressor. It is not just running around saying, hands up, don't shoot. It's recognizing that there is a colonial state that serves the interests of a bourgeoisie, a colonial bourgeoisie that cannot exist except by oppressing and exploiting the masses of people around the world. They got to go. And that's the kind of, and the only reason that doesn't resonate is because you've got movements today that are attempting to make sure that the revolution does not achieve its full significance, its full consciousness, and you can run around following somebody who's saying the revolution is about socialism that will provide $15 an hour over a number of years, which is the most most ridiculous assumptions that's out there. That's why we're having this study, so that we can understand this, so that we don't get on this train of somehow we're just humanists who want everybody to get along together. Hell no. There is no basis for the slave to get along with the slave master. There is no basis for the oppressed to get along with the oppressor. There is no basis for the colonized to get along with the colonizer. What has to happen is, if you kill the slave master, you kill two persons. You kill the slave and the slave master. If you kill the colonizer, you kill two. You kill the colonizer and the colonized. That system has to be overturned if people are going to be free. That's our stance. That's what helps to distinguish us, and that's why we have to do the study, so that opportunistic nonsense cannot prevail, and we can have a genuine revolutionary movement of people who are informed by science and an actual and build actual struggles to win our freedom. So we say that the approach of our party has been to identify the counterinsurgency and all its obvious components as a primary contradiction, and to attempt to win all in our oppressed colonial community who can be won to struggle against the counterinsurgency, including the government importation of drugs into our community and the vicious war against our people in the name of a war against drugs. So both the drugs and the war on drugs constitute a war against the African community. This approach makes the government the enemy and calls on everyone, including the penny ante drug dealers, to unite against the government in every way, including a cessation of distribution and usage of drugs. So this approach unites the oppressed African community against the common enemy, including those kids out there, and sometimes not kids, who are selling and doing drugs. Because many of the people are misinformed, and they actually think they're getting over on the system by doing that, when the only thing they're doing, as we said, licking the blade and participating in their own oppression and exploitation. So the other approach makes the African youth the enemy and unites with the government campaign against them. It is precisely because of this theoretical reliance on the African working class as the social base upon which revolutionary struggle must depend, that our party has been the only organization capable of targeting the counterinsurgency, which has the African working class, employed and unemployed, as the primary victim. We were the only ones. This is also a statement of why, when we deal with the question of theory, we're not just talking about some kind of absolutely abstract question, because theory informs practice. And that's why we were the only one who were able to do that. And also what we will learn is because the party sees itself, ourself, as being the instrument of power, of taking power, of making the revolution, of transforming things, that itself informs our practice in a way that other organizations don't act, because they don't expect to govern. They don't expect to take power. So they can criticize, and they have sometimes great analyses and what have you, but the analysis is weakened 100 times over because it does not include the intent to actually take power. So if you're not talking about taking power, you can be brilliant on the stump. You can be brilliant, talking about things, but you will fall flat in the face of not having a content that includes how to take the power to change the world. Explain the world is wonderfully interesting, but the real task is to change the world. And that's what the party is involved in, and that's one of the things that makes us different. And that's something that members and leaders of the party need to understand as well, that our objective is to change the damn world, not just be able to explain it. We're not just placeholders waiting until the real McCoy gets here. We're not just people who are standing around reminiscing about how wonderful it was, how we heard it was when Malcolm was alive and the Black Panther Party was significant in history. Our responsibility is to make the revolution ourselves. That's what our responsibility is. And that's something that members of and especially leaders of the party must assume the responsibility to do. The theory of our party informs us that without the conscious participation and leadership of the African working class, there will be no revolution. There will be no revolution. The revolution won't come. Without the conscious participation and leadership of the African working class, there will be no revolution. Not the consciousness of everybody in your block, not the consciousness of the 15 people that come to your meeting every now and then, but the African working class must be made conscious and must be brought into participation in making a revolutionary struggle. That's what Huey Newton used to always say, that the masses learn through observation and participation. And that's a maxim that comes from, you can get that in 101 social studies or something here. But the reality is that is the main thing. The people have to be drawn into action, into consciousness. And it's not enough to speak of the people, to speak to the people, to speak about the people, but the people must be drawn into this process. And all of the organization work that we do should be informed by the recognition that the people have to be drawn into the process of drawn into consciousness and the participation of overturning our condition. So we say that, but because the counterinsurgency targeted the ruling class, none of the anti-colonial organizations was willing to recognize it. Wouldn't recognize the counterinsurgency because it targeted the workers and because they have no respect for the African working class, because this is the most criticized sector of the African population. And so nobody could even recognize that this was a war against our community. This is a war against church-going people in hell. I mean, the drugs were, how people are being offended, and I can't walk the streets because of fear of drugs. No, you can't walk the street. You can't walk the streets because the fear of drugs. And if the drugs are not there, you can't walk the street because the fear of the police. And if the drugs and the police are there, you can't walk the street without fear of the police and drugs. The fact is, the police are responsible for each of the things that we're talking about. The state is responsible for that. And so the politic of our party, the theory of our party, informs us what a real enemy is. And so that's what we target. That's what we target. And most of the so-called anti-colonial movements were able to recognize this. I mean, they were the black nationalist petty bourgeois forces. And for them, African sagging was just as bad as the worst thing that could happen. There was somebody who used to do Marcus Garvey work for us, and it was a really great, did really great Marcus Garvey kind of presentations, and in all the regalia that Garvey would wear for special occasions and things like that. But the thing that he would often emphasize in his presentations was how Garvey would criticize the fact that young people don't respect old people, and this was what Garvey was about, a goddamn movement to get black young people to respect old people. This was part of what he was doing in the process of talking about the society that we had to have. But his main target was to overthrow the imperial domination of Africa and African people by white power. That's what he was about. But the class interest, the class position that we take will put emphasis on this thing as opposed to that thing. Emphasis on, well, the black Muslims, they were really wonderful. Malcolm was great because they got a lot of black people off drugs. Hell, the thing that made Malcolm significant was he talked about the difference in the black revolution and the Negro revolution. And what revolutionaries do is assume responsibility for the condition of the whole people. And all responsibility includes the responsibility for getting rid of the oppressor, and in the process, creating the kind of society that we want to have when this oppressor is gone. We're talking about recreating our society as we move forward. But that's a part of the struggle against imperialism, and not some kind of thing that we're going to fix black people so that we act right and talk right, etc. And that somehow becomes the primary thing that's a contradiction. So we say that most of them, some more than others, talking about the anti-colonial movement, period, of the time, actually united with the counterinsurgency slander against our people and the so-called war on drugs initiated by Ronald Wilson Reagan and continued under the regime of U.S. CIA President George Herbert Walker Bush. How can the government has a damn CIA head as the president? And he is the one who's telling us that the main enemy is the black working people in our community. I mean, that's the most ridiculous thing in the world. And of course, you got this cowboy, this Hollywood cowboy out of California, who did everything he could to destroy the Black Panther Party, who did everything he could to define slander black people, so that black women who were receiving welfare were welfare queens, et cetera, made all this war against black people, and he can define our reality for us. He's not defining for Africans in the community, he's defining for the African petty bourgeoisie. Some of them are so-called nationalists, some of them are just ordinary suck-ass, Negroes, but they're all in the same damn camp. And that's what you're gonna see happen with Trump too, I'm telling you. As Trump is moving forward, you're gonna see more and more Africans who, against Trump, you're gonna see the whole establishment begin to move in the direction of Trump's definition of reality. You already see it. When you see the Democratic Party now talking about fixing the contradiction that is confronted with as a party, that being that the Trump victory helped them to understand, and that main contradiction from their perspective was that now we see that we have to go to the white workers, that we lost the white workers, and Trump was able to get the white people. What does that mean? That means that's their primary thing right up front now, that Negroes, what you better do is find a hole to bury yourself in, or find a foxhole to put yourself in, because they are beginning to move in that direction. You're going to see more and more African Negroes who begin to parrot and justify Trump's analysis of reality. You're going to see that within the weeks to come. They might even go and buck dance at his inauguration, some of them. I'm not joking. If they were buck dancing for a saxophone player, Slick Willie, who was a horrendous animal, and he was known to be an animal. for anybody who wants to see it, but they offer some privileges for you can get on the program. You know, with Slick Willie, he gives you a spot on the agenda and the show. I mean, this guy. I mean, all of them are horrible. You know. Anyway, I don't know. So the reality is that while one or two of the anti-colonial organization proclaim to be socialist, and at least one other has been forced to do so as a consequence of struggle with our party, none of them recognizes the African working class aligned with the poor peasantry as the strategic or social base to lead the struggle for socialism and as the basic social force in whose interests our revolutionary society will function. Hence, the national liberation they seek, which can only be under the leadership of the unstable, unreliable, and treacherous African primitive petty bourgeoisie, does not recognize the counterinsurgency as the primary problem that our revolution must solve. This is because their theory does not recognize the African working class as key to the revolution. So they see the drugs and everything, they condemn the people. They don't see the working class as the key. So you have, you know, thugs, dilettantes, you know, that we know in our community, petty bourgeois forces, middle class forces who dabble in drugs and like there's one guy from here who's in a state legislature who is a lawyer, who was a crackhead for years and years, and he uses that I used to be a crackhead, like your local preacher does. I used to get drunk, I used to run around, et cetera, in public. Now I do it privately, but it's the same kind of thing, and he becomes an enemy. He becomes a direct, open enemy of the people, because if I could do this, et cetera, so could you. You don't have to be on drugs. You didn't have to be on drugs either. You know, you came from a middle-class family where you had everything handed to you. If for you, it was just dabbling in the exotic. But African people, most of them are living in pain most of the time, and as a consequence of not having access to the revolution that they had in the 1960s, they engaged in self-medication because they have to deal with flakes. They have to deal with traitors like the African petty bourgeoisie, who are saying the only reason you're not successful is because you're not like me, because you don't act like white people, because you don't talk like white people, et cetera, et cetera. And so this demoralizes the masses of people, and you find people don't have access. They don't have access to Fred Hampton. They don't have access to Malcolm X. They don't have access to the revolution. They don't even have access to Martin Luther King, because the government killed all of them, and then now the masses are left to the devices of the bourgeoisie and these parrots in our own community who is counterinsurgency, who are nothing but sellout neo-colonial forces. So since they don't recognize the working class as the key, then they can't recognize the counterinsurgency. I'm talking now about so-called black nationalist organizations, because I want to be clear on this. Everybody who is unwilling to fight against white power is not somebody who calls himself a Democrat or NAACP or something like that. Some of them are ensconced within the so-called anti-colonial black nationalist community itself. And they are hand in glove with imperialism, because even as they talk all that black talk, the only thing they're trying to do is to keep people away from revolution that will overturn the social system and create and recreate a society, redevelop a society that benefits the majority of us. For 9 months that the 9 months that the series comprising this book ran in the Burning Spear, there was no official response to any of the articles from the New Africanists, or for that matter, by the Pan-Africanists of the All African People's Revolutionary Party, the other tendency briefly criticized. So this thing went on for 9 months, and we didn't hear a single response for 9 months. And these were regular articles in the Burning Spear newspaper, and which was the newspaper. This was the newspaper of the time. At best, there were highly subjective, petulant grumblings from the New African People's Organization at small gatherings, and in one instance through what was supposed to be an endorsement letter to an event on the counterinsurgency sponsored by the African People's Socialist Party. None of these indirect responses addressed the criticism in the Burning Spear articles. Most of them seem to imply that there were no real contradictions to be discussed, and that our insistence of the existence of such contradictions served the U.S. political police and or was a consequence of the flawed theory by the author, by me. However, in April 1990, some 11 months after the series was initiated in the Burning Spear, a 24-page supplement to By Any Means Necessary, the political journal of NAPO, utilized 20 pages as a response to the Burning Spear series. We do not intend to use this introduction to reprint NAPO's response to our series in the Burning Spear or to provide a detailed reply. Our position was essentially stated in the articles which composed this book, and nothing much was stated in NAPO's response to make us belabor the question. One of the techniques of debate used by by the NAPO response was to list a long line of highly esteemed Africans, both living and dead, who agree with their theory of New Africanism. This list even includes Marcus Garvey. And while the Garvey claims is an obvious historical distortion, his struggle with the Communist Party subsidized African blood brotherhood with the same basic line as the New Africans are well known. We are nevertheless well informed of NAPO's approach to theory by this theory by consensus approach. You see, so if everybody agreed with it, it's theory by consensus. It seems that NAPO's position is that if a large number of esteemed Africans have an incorrect theory, then it is okay for NAPO to have an incorrect theory, or that theory can be made correct by the number of esteemed people who support it. If NAPO were really looking for substantial historical evidence of mass African support for either of the three tendencies in question here, New Africanism, All African People's Revolutionary Party Pan-Africanism, or African internationalism, they would look at the period of revolutionary upsurge within the US when all three tendencies were involved in active contention for the leadership of our people. This, of course, was the period of the Garvey movement during the decade ending with the mid-1920s, where the US colonial government, with the assistance of a host of African and North American opportunists, succeeded in arresting Garvey and destroying the movement he led. So it's important to mention that the Garvey movement ended because it was attacked by the government. And the government destroyed the Garvey movement. During this period, the Pan-Africanism of W.E.B. Du Bois, whose modern counterpart would be the AAPRP, and the African Blood Brotherhood, subsidized by the White Nationalist Communist Party USA, which pushes an earlier version of New Africanism, were engaged in intense, sometimes acrimonious struggle with Garvey's United Negro Improvement Association for the leadership of the oppressed African masses. The UNIA was based among the African working masses. This entire program was dependent on the participation of millions of ordinary African working people. Its slogan, Africa for Africans, those at home and those abroad, along with its organization of hundreds of UNIA branches throughout the African world, and the UNIA's unsuccessful attempt to establish its land base in Liberia, all testify to Garvey's understanding that all Africans are one people and Africa is our motherland. The UNIA also differed from the Pan-Africanists in that, unlike the Pan-Africanists, Garvey's movement was based on empowering the African masses as opposed to relying on the goodwill of the liberal bourgeoisie or the African petty bourgeois intellectuals. In the final analysis, it was the UNIA that prevailed with the membership of millions of African people worldwide. If NAPO is to offer us evidence of the historical validity of a theoretical position, then it must not rely on support by a number of esteemed individuals who may or may not support the New Africanist position, given that there has never been any serious ideological struggle within our anti-colonial movement. NAPO must use the period of the Garvey movement when the masses of African people were actively engaged in anti-colonial political life. The ideological debate was intense, and all three tendencies within our movement were in active contention for leadership of our movement. So, during the period of the Garvey movement, we could say that the theory of African internationalism, or African fundamentalism, as Garvey called its earlier version, was validated in practical opposition to imperialism, New Africanism, and Pan-Africanism. Another technique used by the NAPO response was to disclaim responsibility for the theory of its theoretical allies, thereby relinquishing responsibility for any of the criticism made of New Africanism through them in the Burning Spear series. In fact, NATO denies the existence of any theory of New Africanism, which unites all of its adherents. In its response to the Burning Spear series, NATO writes, quote, "There is no theory held by the New Africanist People's Organization called the New African Theory. There is also no single theory held by the entire Republic of New Africa. A New African is an African born in North America. Africans born in North America hold many theories. It follows that New Africans have many theories. Some are socialist, some are capitalist, some are nationalist, some are Pan-Africanist, and so on. Republic of New Africa is the name given to the Black nation in America by 500 nationalist leaders at the Black Government Conference held in Detroit, Michigan, and convened by the Malcolm X Society on March 29, 31st, 1968. So the Republic of New Africa, RNA, consists of a population of millions of people with millions of ideas. Everybody's got his own idea. With what sophistry? What philosophical flimflammery? Of course, there's a single theory that unites the New Africanists by any other name, and that is New Africanism itself, the assumption that such a creature as a New African does exist. It is the assumption that something happened that forged into existence off the base of old Africans captured and brought to the United States in colonial slavery, a new nation of people with historical claims to North American land, who are not only separate and distinct from other Africans in Africa, but also separate and distinct from Africans in Latin America, the Caribbean, Europe, etc. But enough, we could go on forever. What we need to point out here is that after several months of denying the existence of non-police inspired contradictions and differences within our movement, the New African People's Organization did finally sally forth with a grand response to the Burning Spear series, which does its best to vigorously defend its theory and to lay to waste the flawed theory of the African People's Socialist Party. That is as it should be. Our movement will be the stronger for it. Now, the next one is this. The opening salvo on this discussion, initiated by myself in the May 1969 issue of the Burning Spear, was an immediate response to a clear and dangerous escalation of the counterinsurgent attack on African people by the U.S. government and the inadequacy of our anti-colonial movement as revealed by its general inability to recognize or deal with it. This was the starting point of our discussion of opportunism and theoretical inadequacy within our movement as revealed in the All African People's Revolutionary Party's Pan-Africanism and in New Africanism. Nowhere does the 20-page retort by NAPO seriously address these important critical questions. Does NAPO disagree with our party's assessment of the significance of the current U.S. counterinsurgency against our movement for happiness and return of the value of more than 400 years of stolen material resources? This is not the same as saying, as NAPO does, that articles have been published in the newspaper saying the U.S. is involved in the drug trade. Is NAPO satisfied with the state of our anti-colonial movement, within which hucksterism and opportunism of every shade abound? These are the questions we pose in the Burning Spear. These are the questions we pose now. For this is the moment when our movement is faced with momentous choices during a volatile time, when a page is turning in human history, ending one era and initiating another. Whither the Black liberation movement? Whither the struggle for Black power in the U.S. and the world? Can NAPO answer these questions? Within the African People's Socialist Party, we have declared this the era of the worldwide African revolution and socialist unification of African people under the leadership of the African working class and poor peasants. But we have also concluded that the first step down the path to liberation demands a struggle against opportunism within the anti-colonialist movement in general, within the Uhuru movement led by our party and within the African People's Socialist Party itself. Two final points. The polemic with the new African People's Organization should not be seen by anyone as antagonistic. We were truly surprised and shocked by the subjective response NAPO demonstrated throughout this discussion. It is our hope and our intention at this moment to find the means of achieving principled unity with NAPO in as many anti-colonial projects as possible, just as we have done with the New Africanists in the past. Secondly, at one point in NATO's response to the Burning Spear series, the fact that our party holds as a strategic objective the task of transforming every African community within the U.S. into fighting Soviets for political independence, African liberation, and socialism was held as evidence of theoretical inconsistency on our part, since we hold that Africans hold no historically derived claim to the land of the indigenous people still under genocidal assault by the settler colonialist U.S. government. Not so. Our position has always held that this land is the land of the native people who are still struggling over the consequences of being stripped off, of it being ripped off from them by U.S. imperialism. The national homeland of African people is Africa, the focus of our national identity and ultimately the source of our total liberation and destiny. It is our position that any theory concerning land in the U.S. that has a semblance of integrity must first of all concede that this land is the land of the native people. To argue that only a few native people have survived U.S. settler colonialism, or that some native people agree that Africans can establish a post-revolutionary state within current U.S. borders begs the question. However, having said this, our theory does not prohibit our movement or a sector of it, having conceded whose land this really is and waging a struggle for African liberation which consciously coincides with the native struggle against settler colonialism and for their land, from fighting to establish an independent African state on land conceded by our native allies. Such a struggle is quite possible. While the party's strategic objective as stated above does not call for such a struggle under the conditions just described, we could unite with those who do. In any event, we do not expect this will be the last word on the questions raised in this book. We remain open to questions and struggles concerning these and other questions. We hope this contribution will raise the level of discussion and maturity within our entire movement, Israel to Africa. So that is the introduction. We've just gone through it. I hope that it will inspire some discussion. I hope that others have read this. I know you got this late, so it's quite possible that you did not have opportunity to read it, but I hope just having gone through that, it proves to be informative. And I'd like to first just look at who's in this meeting with us to make sure that we have everyone, and then open it up for discussion. So I have here Colombai, Timba, Penny, Moteba, Star, Desun, Mike Love, Maureen, Ruby, Fosia, Kitty, Ikenge, Ali, Chimarenga, Makta, Gazi, Kefin, Stephanie, Fofi, Ilikia, Shango, Janice, and Sandy. Who have I missed? Alienza. How you doing?
Okay.
Okay, I'm glad to hear that.
Glad you meet.
Who is that? The last person?
Unique.
Unique.
Oh.
And who else?
Tomway.
Tomway. And Rafiq.
Oh.
Anyone else?
And Kashama.
Kashama. Anybody else?
Oh, Fight.
Fight. Shuhulu, I haven't heard from you in a long time. Anybody else?
Oh, Chair.
Anybody else? All right.
From Chicago.
Who is that?
From Chicago.
I heard Chicago.
Sifu.
Is it Sifu?
Yes, Chairman.
Okay. Uhuru.
Kalanda.
Kalonda.
Badori.
Who is that? Pretoria. Badori. Say it again. Badori. Is that in Birmingham?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. Anybody else? All right, let's talk about it. Let's talk about it. Let's open it up and see how people experience this study, what was thought about it. Who?
Call in, I'm watching online.
Oh, Tavares.
Yes.
Tavares, okay. So I want to go ahead and open it up. Daesoon.
First of all, I want to appreciate Chairman for this this study, this introduction to Black Power since the 60s, and really appreciating the theory of African internationalism, and truly understanding what it means that, you know, if you don't have a theory of your own, you begin to rely on the theory of, you know, other people and the oppressor, and really laying out the different ways that counterinsurgency has attacked the movement, be it from direct assault on the community, like you said, the drugs, and the police, and also these different organizations that, you know, pull our people in a direction that's not going to bring us liberation or freedom. So I really want to appreciate this study, and also feel like have a better understanding and a better way to explain to people all the different ways in which the movement is attacked and different ways that keeps people from moving towards actual liberation. So I appreciate this study.
Hold on. Anyone else? That's really important in Agitprop. Agitprop has a fundamental responsibility of developing and distributing ideas, and should be the firewall inside the party and inside the African Revolution that protects us from enemy theory and ideology. And I just think it's really important to understand the significance of it. We don't just have these to be able to win arguments, you know, with our friends and stuff like that. But they really, theory informs practice. That's the thing that we really have to understand. If you really unite with a particular kind of theory, it will say something about how you work. And that's where criticism and self-criticism plays such an important role in our work, because you can think that's what you're doing, but when you're working with other comrades who have the ability to criticize what it is that you're doing, then they can say that does not fit with where it is that we're trying to go. African internationalism will not head us in this direction. You're going in, you know, some other kind of direction, etc. So I think that's important. Anyone else?
Uhuru, Chairman.
Uhuru. Yes, Foots.
Would you think, well, do you think that the other organizations had a fear of justice and that they did not really know how to lead, or that independence would be the reason why they renounced or tried to speak against the things that was in those articles as being true? That meant they would have been responsible for upholding the neo-colonial fix.
I don't think it was ignorance that was responsible for their political stance. And I think it's really important for us to understand that, because many people even want to excuse Barack Obama, Hussein Obama, just saying, well, he just didn't understand. This guy's a damn, what is it, Harvard graduate who's got more information at his fingertips than people, most people. And yet there are people in the housing projects who have a better grip on what the hell an explanation than what Obama does. So it's not ignorance. What it is, and please mute, comrades, mute your phone. Everybody mute, please. what it is, that it's class interests. And that there are sectors of the African middle class, petty bourgeoisie, who will reach the conclusion for any number of reasons that they cannot be successful under white power as it now affects them and us, and that they want to see either a shift of ownership or a shift of management over the establishment, but they don't want to see a change in the system that will allow the African workers and poor people to ascend to their proper status as leadership in the community, in a country, in a world, an economy that can only be successful through the efforts of the workers and the peasants. So they have a class interest. Their ignorance is informed by their interest as a social class, as a social force. So it's not just some not knowing. In fact, they do know. They do know if we come to power, their way of life is over. Their way of life is over. And they're gonna have to find another titty to suck, or go on Similac or something like that. You know, that's what they understand. So I think that's the basis of Similac. What's it called? Similac?
Yes,
Okay.
Similac.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, y'all should know about that because people should, you know, that's another scam that we won't have time to get into. Any other discussion? Comrades? Penny?
Well, Chairman, yes, I just really want to thank you for the study, and I think that this introduction is so excellent because of the fact that it, you know, raises the question of opportunism and what it really means as a class question inside of the movement, and the way that you struggle that the question of the counterinsurgency, and by, you know, inference, I guess the class analysis of the counterinsurgency was the key question of that period, and in many ways it still is.
Yeah.
And that that other sectors of what called themselves the African Revolution or the African Liberation Movement was collaborating with the state in the attack on the African working class, which the party has never done because it recognizes the state and the colonial contradiction. I mean, I just think that all of this is so clear in here. You know, I just think it's one of the most clear ways that this question of opportunism is exposed, and it shows how the new African organization, as you quote from them, say, well, we're just everybody. We're all classes, basically, in the African community. So therefore, it's a replication of what U.S. imperialism's own definition of that. And how could it embody all the interests of all the people, which it cannot do? So therefore, it's at a standstill, you know. And I just really want to appreciate this and think that it's so clarifying in so many ways.
Well, hold on. Yeah, what it is if everybody's responsible, nobody's responsible. You understand? So we got everybody, you know, got their own thing. So nobody's responsible for how anybody, perceives the world. And the other thing about this question that we were taking on at this instance, I mean, this was just something that gives us an opportunity to have something to grapple with so that we can understand this phenomenon when we see it. Because we've also seen it in the last period. We've seen it with all of the hands up, don't shoot. That don't get to the real question. Don't get to the real question. Black Lives Matter. Don't get to the real question. And how there are movements that will try to reconcile the oppressor and the oppressed worldview into one. And we have to, and we are at a place now where we are messing with both of those, trying to forge a way forward. And when you see like the whole Hillary Clinton versus Trump thing, how this whole wedding to the Clintons, and what a deadly opportunistic kind of thing, how and the Democratic Party, how the mass of our people have been left defenseless in the face of this entity, this imperialist colonialist entity, because they like the representatives of one sector of the bourgeoisie as opposed to another sector of the bourgeoisie. And of course, the party, when we take these stances, we have been accused at different times of isolating ourselves, of sticking out, out in such a way that is dangerous. And of course, it is. It can be dangerous. But the way we try to do it is we try to bring masses with us. So it's not just a matter of us sticking out and making some silly statement and then say, let's, throwing ourselves on the sword, but trying to awaken masses of people, because we understand that people are the real heroes, are the real makers of history, not individuals in the party. But I think that this question, where you see all these people relying on the Clinton, that's the work that we do with the Black is Black Coalition, which is so important because it gives us an opportunity to go get masses of people and bring them to a better conclusion, a better understanding, as opposed to simply relying on the Democratic Party. And we've seen splits and differences up in the coalition based on the same question. It's a tenuous kind of thing, even as we have this discussion today about how it is that we move forward. And we hear this even in the meeting that we had on yesterday. How do we move forward? Broad masses of people in the struggle against colonialism. So I think that this whole question of opportunism is very deep, very profound. And if we hold true, there are two things here. If we hold true to African internationalism, our faith in the masses of African people, one, and then we learn the art of leading, so that even people with whom we disagree, but who have no stakes, no material interests, like people can be wrong because the bourgeoisie or the petty bourgeoisie is speaking through their mouths. They have control of their conscience, but they don't have a material interest in the position. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like the petty bourgeoisie has a material interest in the ongoing continuation of this goddamn social system. Masses of working class people do not have a material interest, but they may come out of their mouths with stuff that comes from the petty bourgeoisie. They can be, the likelihood of them changing is much greater than the likelihood of somebody who's got a stake in the system remaining as it is. That's what I'm talking about. And you will find some people who are ignorant and who will say stuff because we haven't had access to their brains in the same fashion the petty bourgeoisie, but you treat them differently. And even forces from the petty bourgeoisie, they're forces from the petty bourgeoisie who work with us, not because they believe so much in us, etc., but they see in us some kind of power, some kind of influence, some kind of organization that can take them to a place that they're not in, and they sometimes expect to use us to get to those places. You can be conscious of the fact that somebody is trying to use you, but you want to get a particular place, and you just keep your eye on them as we're moving forward because they happen to push the car at the moment. You understand? But at the time they start trying to stick nails in the damn tire, then you get rid of them. But the point is, there's an art. There's an art. It's not good enough just to know. There's an art in how you make it happen, how you move it forward, and achieving the art is just a critical thing. That's critically important. And that doesn't mean sacrificing principle, because we do not sacrifice principle. Uhuru. Anybody else?
Chairman.
And this is?
Hello?
Yes, who is this?
Uhuru.
Uhuru.
This is Sifu.
This is who?
Sifu.
Sifu, okay.
Yes, sir. You really hit it right on the head when you mentioned the Republic of New Africa, and then last week's study when you mentioned the All African People's Revolutionary Party. And the reason why I say that is because I used to study, quote unquote, with both groups many years ago, Malcolm X grassroots movement, which is the New African Republic of New Africa's mass organization, and then just a year ago with the All African People's Revolutionary Party. And you were exactly right when you said that that's all they do is study. They don't prepare for nothing. They don't prepare for no kind of struggles or any kind of work. I just found that absolutely amazing.
Yeah. Uhuru. Yeah. Anybody else?
Yeah, you hear me?
Yes, who is this?
This is Chris.
Where are you located, Chris?
Say again?
Where are you located?
I'm in prison.
Okay, go ahead, Chris. Can you say which prison without sacrificing your security?
I don't think so.
Okay, go ahead. Talk, Chris. Go ahead.
Few questions. Do you think that subtracting ourselves? I have a friend who is a girl, and she has a few friends who participate in the Black Lives Movement campaign. And I want to upgrade their thinking in always being a response to the death of Black people. So I could not wait until I get to a position where I could reach and touch Uhuru, right? So my question is, do you think that, two questions is, do you think that participating in the political structure movement and Bernie Sanders' campaign would have led us towards a more socialistic, communistic ideology in the political sphere of America? Because one of the things that I've read and studied and learned is that capitalism's eventual demolishment is going to be the coming forth of socialism and communism, inevitability, as long as the people, because of its hunger and falling upon itself under its own weight. But that's not to say it's an inevitable thing. I'm not sure about the inevitability of it anymore. But the two questions are, do you think that the participation in the voting process and the Bernie Sanders campaign versus the Hillary Clinton campaign would have gotten us to a more socialistic, communistic ideology, and therefore a free African people?
Well, hold on. Let me just say that I think that's a splendid question. I think the question is, the problem, however, is that the question is framed improperly. Because it sort of assumes that the only options for fighting for socialism and communism is within the electoral process and Sanders versus Clinton. That's the first problem, that the question is framed in a fashion that liquidates any form of achieving socialism or communism other than through the electoral process as it relates to Sanders and Clinton. Secondly, Sanders was not going to help us get to socialism, but he was going to divert people from socialism. Because there's nothing that Sanders used the word socialism, but what he defined as his so-called political revolution had nothing to do with real socialism. Socialism is not fighting to get $15 an hour over a number of years, maybe, which is the best Sanders came up with. Socialism is where the workers actually come to be the one who own and control the means of production. The workers decide who the hell is going to get anything, and old white guys like Sanders, who lived off the flesh of the damn people, might be in for a bad turn. So it's not a matter. It's not a matter. And the other thing I want to say is, in terms of, we don't need Sanders to take us to socialism. In our communities, and history has shown us, it's not been the white left that's taken us to socialism. The Black Panther Party came closest to really generalizing the whole issue of communism, socialism, revolution than any white left organization that ever existed in this country. The African People's Socialist Party, JOMO, other forces like that on the ground in our communities were the ones that brought us to consciousness of the requirement for socialist revolution. The other thing you raised has to do with tactics and strategy for mobilizing organized people into the camp of socialism, and that has to do with whether the electoral process in any fashion can be utilized, etc. And we say, yeah, you can use the electoral process, but finally, on the question of socialism, no socialism, purported socialism, that does not speak to the parasitic nature of capitalism itself. And the fact that the only way capitalism was born was not through some, there was no mystery there, but it was through slavery and colonialism. And the only way capitalism would die is as a consequence of the slave and the colonized being overthrowing that, which means you have a white world that actually literally depends on its success at this time in history on colonialism. It depends on having a secure future on colonialism. It makes its plans for the wedding of their children based on the assumption that that the niggas of the world are not going to overturn the whole damn system that white power and white security rests on. So what has to happen is for white people have to find a way to enter into the debate and struggle for communism and socialism based on the terms of the anti-colonial revolution, not the other way around. And white people are going to have to be able to join under the leadership of the most oppressed African working class of the indigenous peoples and colonized peoples of the world. At the moment the majority, a mass of white people are able to do that, then we'll see a turning point, a rapid turning point in history. Listen, there's a debate going on now that's really important. It's a debate that you can find its centered in the Democratic Party, but many of its offshoots and wings, formal and informal, that calls itself variation of the white left, including Bernie Sanders, that deals with the issue of whether or not Trump was successful because the left and Democrats abandoned the white working class. And of course, the answer to that is yes. That's why he was successful. But what they mean by that is, should we now turn our backs on other things and go and just get the white workers? We say that yes, they abandoned the white working class. We've been struggling with the white left for 20, 30 years around this question that they would simply call white workers rednecks and call white workers nasty names and not try to organize the white workers, but would find themselves fighting me in my community because they would decide they were going to organize black people, they're going to organize Mexicans, etc. But that is not enough to say they have to go to the white working class, because the white working class has to find the ability, first of all, to engage in a serious self-criticism. And we have to criticize the white working class even as we talk about organizing the white working class for its fidelity, for its love, for its commitment to white nationalism and its own bourgeoisie and the oppression of other peoples around the world. And for the white working class to actually come into full play, into real struggle, then the white working class has to be able to unite under the leadership of African workers and other oppressed people. And it has to be able, as I said, to engage in self-criticism for the role that it has played historically in killing Indians and taking Mexican land and of course oppressing and lynching African people. If it can overcome that hurdle, then it will have achieved a whole new status and a whole new stature, and then we'll have rejoined the rest of humanity, and we'll get rid of capitalism in a much more pleasant way. As Sundiata Accola used to say, the more sweat in peace, the less bloodshed in war. And what white workers are going to have happen, and we're going to have to provide the leadership, unfortunately, even for the white working class, to help them to cross over to the right side of history so that we can all target the bourgeoisie, the white ruling class. I've overtalked the point, but I hope I was understood. Anybody else? Yes, Timber.
We have a question from Facebook.
Facebook question.
Yes. I'm trying to find the names. I can't find it no more. It's Del Sol. What's his name? D. Del Sol.
Of the Sun. D. Del Sol?
D. Del Sol.
Of the Sun. Yeah. Okay.
In your opinion,
must be in San Francisco. But go ahead.
In your opinion, does everyone have to become part of the poor working class to unite? If not, how can unity be encouraged between those who are invested and those who are not invested in this system?
Well, I don't, does everyone have to be? No, here's what we have. And this is, I'm glad you raised that, because the African People's Socialist Party, we are part of an oppressed nation that has been dispersed all around this world. And a nation is comprised of an assortment of class forces, workers, peasants, there are petty bourgeois forces, etc. But the whole nation experiences oppression as a nation. That's what being colonized means. But the question so everybody who can be united around some basic national democratic principles to fight against colonial white power must be united to do that. We want to unite the whole nation. Only the working class has the ability to do that. And the reason this is true is because the African petty bourgeoisie cannot see beyond its own narrow class interests as a social force, which means that too often they will fight against the working class because the working class success will mean overturning a system that they depend on, that they rely on. The working class has the ability through its revolutionary party to see the whole picture. And we understand that the working class cannot be successful unless the nation is liberated. So we will do and come up with platforms and programs and strategies to unite the whole nation in order to make it possible for the working class to assume its proper station in society. And so that means that different sectors of the African population can be thrust into the struggle against white power, against colonialism, against national oppression. But the working class has to lead this because the outcome, the finality of this has to be the ascendancy of the African working class. That sector of the population that is responsible for producing value, producing wealth, everything that it takes to feed, clothe, and house our people has to be the group, the entity that assumes social ownership of the society that we create. So yeah, I mean, we want everybody to be united in overthrowing this monster. Uhuru. Anybody else?
Yeah, Uhuru, Tim.
Yes, K-Fin.
Yeah, I want to just go back to the question that both Pete raised in terms of whether or not NAPO was, was ignorant to the question of just how could they come up with such a, theory. But I think it is a class question. But, I think to be actual revolutionary, that you of necessity got to be an ardent anti-capitalist. I think when we look at what had happened over in Cuba, like Castro from the petty bourgeoisie, in fact his father big time landowner, but I think that his father's farm was one of the first properties seized and redistributed to the people. So, and when I look at the photo of Fidel and Leopold Cabral together over in Cuba, and Cabral raising the whole question of class suicide, then you wonder how this could happen, and it can happen if you an anti-capitalist, which NAPO and the other groups never condemn capitalism, not even as hard as they condemn the youngsters who are out on the streets getting drugs. So being anti-capitalist is a prerequisite for being a revolutionary.
Uhuru. I think it's possible K-Fing, for forces to be engaged in anti-colonial revolution and not be capitalist. But I think it's limited to like even struggle for independence, which is to overthrow direct white power. But I think it's limited. What that means is limited because it won't result in social transformation. You have the same more or less setup after conquest. You just have black people who are now taking the place of the white people who dominated before, even if the white people are kicked out of the country. And we've seen places where white people were at least officially and formally kicked out of the country. And then black people took over as horrible tyrants because they, even with national liberation, quote unquote, there still was not social transformation. And I think that another thing is that it's not even just what you call yourself, because the AAPRP also always called itself socialist. It said that they believe in scientific socialism, what the hell that meant. when the students were, they saw the students as the spark or the primary social force, and the students don't constitute a class. They don't constitute a social force as such. And so they call themselves socialists. Bernie Sanders is a socialist by definition. But what does that mean? It doesn't mean that the ascendancy of the people who produce value to the leadership of society. For him, it just means that the bosses now gives you $15 an hour while they still only control the means of production. I just think that I think it's an ongoing discussion that we will have. It's one that has really confused a lot of so-called communists and socialists and revolutionaries on the African continent itself, who have seen what they would characterize as liberation, and they still see the state that Africa is in under these neo-colonial puppet regimes. So, I guess if we extend the definition of liberation to include a revolution, to include the overthrow of the capitalist system itself, then I guess it's appropriate to argue that one has to be, but more than an anti-capitalist, because if you say you're an anti-capitalist, I mean, what the hell does that mean? Because we've heard people who talk about a third way, like there's some other kind of socialism. You can't be a damn feudalist, I hope. So what are you going to be? So I think we have to take it a step further than that and saying that socialism, which is the thing that we force. It's like Muhammad Ali and the big guy he fought when he said, Ernie Terrell, what's my name? That you got to call it by its name. What is it that you're talking about if you're against capitalism? Like right now we hear this play on word where people talk about the black left and, this whole notion of black progressives and the unwillingness to say that there's a petty bourgeois, neo-colonial social force and the black misleadership class. What the hell does that mean? And I think it's a way of liquidating the definition of class, cleavages that exist in the African community. And when you want to confuse the class question, it's usually because you sympathize or have some kind of relationship with the African petty bourgeoisie or that class that is in power. But that's an extended discussion that we're going to be continuing to have. Uhuru. Anybody else, comrades?
This is Fights out of New York, comrades. Chairman, question. There's been a rising of indigenous people resisting colonialism since April out of this standard by reservation over the pipeline. Yeah. And we had some Africans who are commenting about that particular struggle, but the view is extremely narrow, whereas they're talking about how can Africans be support of the standing rock, no pipeline thing, and there's no indigenous people marching when some African gets killed. Can you speak to that narrow view?
Yeah, it's narrow, and it's a bourgeois kind of worldview. It is an ongoing attack made by sectors of the African petty bourgeoisie, sometimes radical and sometimes even nationalist African petty bourgeoisie in our communities that would work to split the colonized people, to divide people who are colonized and have one common enemy. It is a nasty, it is, in some ways, it's silly in the sense that our stance does not require consciousness on the part of other people. Like, if you go by that, then you say the majority of African people should not be supported because the majority of only a tiny minority of African people march when black people get shot. So if our stance required them to be conscious of the need to march, then we wouldn't have a goddamn movement. And the same thing is true about having an objective. Understand there's an objective reality that we're confronted with that's independent of the consciousness of human beings, many instances, but we're all subject to certain kinds of laws of society. And we give absolute and total support to the indigenous people, because there was a time when we couldn't march in this country, and when we got here, the only friends we had were the indigenous people. That's how the Seminoles are black. That's why they even call Seminoles the runaways and what have you. That's why so many Africans, when they're not just trying to escape being black, talk about their cousin or their grandmama who was an Indian and stuff like that, because there's a lot of truth in it. That's why the bloodthirsty Jackson, who was on the $20 bill that the feminist movement now has put to the back of it and put Harriet Tubman on the front. That's why Jackson waged this war, this Indian killer war against the indigenous people in Georgia and the state of Florida, because he was trying to recapture Africans who had escaped and joined with the indigenous people. That's why even the Trail of Tears, the bodies of the people who died in the Trail of Tears include Africans who had become part of the Indian groups, had been welcomed by the indigenous people. So that's just a really bad, informed and nasty bourgeois worldview that is responsible for that kind of politics. We should treat it with disdain and contempt, but informed disdain and informed contempt, so that we can argue for all those people who see the debate. We can't argue with these guys, but there are other people who see this debate and hear the claim, and that's who we're talking to when we make our arguments. Uhuru.
Uhuru, right on, Chairman.
Anybody else, comrades?
Uhuru, Chairman, Kashama.
Yes, Kashama.
First of all, I appreciate the study, a very, deep explanation of issues that you addressed, many times before. But my question is, can you explain why African people shouldn't be celebrating along with the colonial government Fidel Castro's death, as well as can you also explain like why, when we look at a lot of the people out there celebrating it tends to be like white Cubans, and it seems like most of the Africans are still like in Cuba.
Well, one thing I say is, if the U.S. celebrated, oppose it. I mean, if the slave master likes it, then there must be something wrong with it. So there must be an element of. I used to say a long time ago that if you want to really get rid of drugs in the African community, get a tractor trailer and paint it red, white, and blue with the American flag on it, and drive it up in the middle of the community and say free crack. I think even crackheads and addicts would run from that. I just think, generally speaking, if the American government is for it, damn it, you're opposed to it. But beyond that, of course, is that Cuba was really significant, in some ways similar to Haiti. The Haitian Revolution, please mute, everybody comrades, mute. The Haitian Revolution, which startled the entire capitalist world, because what it did, please mute your phone. Because what it did was, it made an assault on the world economy that was based on slavery. And so you have all these African people say, we don't have to be slaves anymore, to kill the oppressor, kill the slave master, ended slavery, and then said, any other slave anywhere on earth, come to Haiti, you can be free. And so you had a free black republic at a time when the whole world economy was based on slavery, at a time when the lie was that black people couldn't run anything. We were too stupid, too ignorant to have anything. And here in Haiti, we've done that, come up with a splendid constitution. We've opened the door to oppressed peoples around the world. It was just oppressed people everywhere. Look at Haiti. You have to understand, not just Africans, but all over the world. I mean, this guy, Simon Bolivar, when trying to make this revolution in Colombia and other areas, he went to Haiti to try to get resources. And of course, he double-crossed the Haitians after they gave him help. Mexico, in Mexico, the first president in Mexico was an Indo-African, Guerrero, who tried to fund a Haitian expedition that would go into Cuba to liberate Africans who were enslaved there. So that became the real symbol, and it became a serious threat because it belied every damn thing that an economy based on slavery had promoted as the inferiority of Africans, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So they isolated that. Cuba made this revolution, and it defies everything because, you know, what they call, they used to speak of places where, in South America in particular, but Cuba's in the Caribbean, but it's been, you know, identified with South America partially because of the Spanish language and et cetera, and the banana republics and you know, the lazy people, et cetera. And Cuba had become a cesspool for mafia and white, you know, people with resources, et cetera. And they always justified doing that because of the incompetence and ineptitude of the people. And when the Cubans made this damn revolution there, and then said, not only is this a revolution, but we're getting rid of all of the damn, they took land that had been handed over to U.S. corporations by a neo-colonial puppet, Batista. They made immediate attacks on what people characterize as segregation and et cetera. They provided free education. Now, the capitalist model was being disproved because everybody had an education, everybody had free housing, everybody had free health care, etc. And it was something that the bourgeoisie had to destroy. This symbol of workers in power was a huge threat to a social system that was based on exploitation. And it was a huge threat to a social system that required sucking the blood of colonized people all around the world. And here the Cubans have broken free from colonialism. And so all of the white, not all of the white power, because some had less stakes in Cuba than others, but certainly the US bourgeoisie went against Cuba. Then Cuba was the place. Now, remember, the Cuban Revolution occurred in 1959. And not too long after the Cuban Revolution, you have this comrade Robert Williams, who in Monroe, South Carolina, where in 1957, I think it was, that he led this movement, headed up the NAACP, led this armed movement in Monroe, North Carolina. When he finally was chased out of the country where he was trying to lynch him, he ends up in Cuba. Cuba extended an open door to him. Cuba gave him a radio pro show, Radio Free Dixie, that was playing to Africans, you know, everywhere. Cuba, when they finally achieved independence and came to the United Nations and was denied, you know, various kinds of resources in New York, they went to Harlem and they met with Malcolm X and they lived in Harlem and what have you. Cuba, who tried to extend the Cuban Revolution to Africa, where Che went to Africa and tried to initiate a continental-wide revolutionary movement. Cuba, that fought the South Africans in Angola and crushed their asses to defeat the whole notion of the invincibility of those white people there. Cuba, who opened the door for Huey P. Newton, for Eldridge Cleaver, for members of the Black Panther Party, and where Assata Shakur is living even now. I mean, this is Cuba, and this is why we have to support it. And of course, the U.S. and other powers like that, especially U.S., will be opposed to Cuba because it belies every lie that they've ever told about the ability of the workers, etc. And there's some truths that they tell, as I mentioned earlier, that they did expropriate land. They took some of the land from different people. They took the houses from different people who were the ones who were from the rulers, and they distributed that among the oppressed and poor people, just as it will happen in any other place where a revolution is successful. So, I mean, that's what I would say to that, comrade. So, listen, it is now, we have just 10 minutes left, and I think we have to use these 10 minutes for announcements. And first thing I do want to say is that I want to say that I'm really glad that people were able to acknowledge in this meeting the passing of Comandante Fidel Castro. I think Fidel Castro was an incredibly significant force during this era. One of the most important forces, people, including myself, like to romanticize Che Guevara, who was a magnificent guerrilla, but the revolutionary who helped to shape this era was Fidel Castro, who helped to raise up socialist morality and who made great sacrifices. Fidel and the Cubans, under the leadership of Fidel Castro, made tremendous sacrifices for the struggles of oppressed peoples around the world. And this is not to say that the Cuban Revolution was perfect. It couldn't be perfect because it fell victim also to Marx's assumption that somehow just workers coming to power is significant for overthrowing capitalism, when the real world is that parasitics. Anyway, so I'm just going to leave it there. And but Cuba was very important. I'm really glad that people here were able to have an opportunity to recognize that. The announcements, Timber, you want to go ahead and start off? Were you going to make it? I want to announce that on January 7th through the 9th, the party is having a magnificent plenary. Everybody on this call should be in St. Petersburg, Florida. It's going to be a 3-day plenary that happens under the theme of putting revolution back on the agenda, which is something that the party has recognized for a while now is extremely important, because nobody talks about revolution anywhere, including Cuba. And revolution has to be put back on the agenda, and the revolution has to reassume leadership in this country. So people should come to St. Petersburg, Florida. You can find out more about this by going to, what is that? Do we have a website? APSP. APSP Plenary, PLENARY.org, APSPplenary.org. So we want people to attend that. The other thing that's really important is that a lot of people have been knocked out of orbit by the election of Donald Trump. And many people are being in a quandary, and some even facing a state of hysteria by his ascendancy or descendancy to descent to the helm of the U.S. government. And as always, the African People's Socialist Party is trying to provide leadership for masses of our people, that we don't have to be frightened. We can lead this, that the entire ruling class is fractured, that both the instruments, political parties, the Republicans and the Democratic Party are both floundering, trying to find their footing and reassess the ability to win. That more than 100 million people did not participate in this electoral process, even though people assume the election is the only legitimate way of achieving power in this country, where the two leaders, Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, had the highest negative polling of any in history, and that Donald Trump has the highest negative polling rate of any president ever in the history, the most despised, most disliked. So we see that there's a certain sector of the population that really loves Donald Trump, but he ended up with maybe 25% of the vote. And so it is our it's our responsibility to provide some leadership for the people. And so we have been working with the Black is Back Coalition for Social Justice, Peace, and Reparations. In many ways, we've anticipated this moment. And we, on January 14th in Washington, D.C., at Freedom Plaza, which is right across the street from the hotel where Martin Luther King is assumed to have written the I Have a Dream speech, Freedom Plaza, January 14th. We are having a rally for self-determination. We're saying Black is back. And we want to get thousands. Our expectation is to get a minimum of 5,000 African people to Freedom Plaza on January 14th, which is the day before the anniversary of the birth of Martin Luther King, and 6 days before the inauguration of Donald Trump as the 45th president of the United States. So we want everybody to begin making efforts to get to Washington, D.C. So there are two really important dates for members of our party and of the Uhuru movement. One is January 7th through the 9th. We want everybody to be in St. Petersburg, Florida. But even in St. Petersburg, Florida, as we're preparing for the plenary, we're also preparing by next week this time, we want to have paid for a bus that's going to take a minimum of 50 people to Washington, D.C. in the plenary. And I'm hoping other people are planning in the same fashion. This is an opportunity for the Uhuru movement and the party to really establish ourselves as a revolutionary leadership of the entire African Revolution, certainly the U.S. front of the African Revolution. We do that, then we extend our influence throughout the African world. So, are there any other announcements? Desun.
I just want to let everybody know that this Tuesday, November 29th, is Giving Tuesday. It's an international campaign where different people around the world donate to different organizations. I want to encourage people to go on to blackpower96.org where you can find out more information about what Giving Tuesday is, and also take our Black Power 96 Music Challenge. And go on to Facebook, our Facebook page, Black Power 96. Share our videos, take the music challenge, and share them with your friends, and encourage everybody to donate on blackpower96.org.
I have a question. Is tomorrow the date that the contractor is supposed to lay the foundation? Yeah. Monday is the day the contractor will lay the foundation for the tower, for the antenna for Black Power 96. So it seems that we're moving forward. Yes. Is there anything else, comrades?
What is Black Power station? Black Power 96 is a radio station, right?
Black Power 96 is
the radio station.
The radio station. Right.
So next Sunday, we want to look at the first chapter in Black Power since the 60s. I think this is going to be a really important study, and in many ways it'll bring people up to date and help show people how to recognize different kind of political lines that we are contending with. And that starts on page 15, the counterinsurgency against our people and the response of the Black movement. So I want to appreciate everybody's participation. There's some of you who have to attend. Uhuru?
Chairman, sorry, I was on mute. This is Ghazi.
Yes,
I'm going to make an announcement about the plenary that we're having in St. Petersburg, Florida, from January 7th to January 9th.
You must have been on mute and on deaf because we just made that announcement. But go ahead, you can make it again. You overkill. Do it. Go ahead, comrade.
Okay. Go to apstplenary.org to register and register now. Thank you.
Uhuru. All right. So one should not believe that simply because Ghazi came on to make that announcement that he was not listening to other parts of the study. Thank you so much, comrades. Next Sunday, we'll get to the chapter 1, the counterinsurgency against our people and the response of the Black movement. Uhuru.
YouTube's still going.
So
I think it's still streaming to the YouTube.